Hello learners, and welcome to this session in which we will be covering today the major themes of block number 6 of the course Disability, Society and Culture. So the block is titled Disability, Accessibility and Technology. Now dear learners, we have been highlighting throughout the course that accessibility is a key issue and concern with regard to the rights of persons with disabilities. Without access to social participation, without access to the various facilities or the various aspects of social life that non-disabled persons are entitled to, persons with disabilities will really not be able to realize their rights in the fullest manner possible. And that is why accessibility is such an important issue. Now, we also will be exploring how technology can play a major role in making inaccessible environments and systems accessible to persons with disabilities. So let's look at the three major units or the three units of this particular block. Unit number 18, which we will be discussing in the first part of the program, is titled Physical, Social and Technological Access. Unit 19 speaks of assistive technologies, and Unit 20 speaks of universal design. Now, we'll amplify the meanings of these terms as we go along. But let's first begin with a very, very important understanding. So, we have also stated in the course on several occasions that all of us are what is termed only temporarily able-bodied. In other words, disability is something that can happen to any individual at any point of time in his or her life. So because all of us have a vulnerability, all of us can at any point of time need support, that is why accessibility becomes such an important factor. Not just for inclusion of persons with disabilities, but for all members of society who may need accessibility at any point of time in their lives. So for instance, people who are elderly, pregnant women, small children, all of them have vulnerabilities. They may not be able to do things as efficiently as adults who are able-bodied. And therefore, accessibility becomes a very, very important concern or a very important right for everybody, and of course, for persons with disabilities. We've also discussed in detail in the previous units and blocks of this course how persons with disabilities often encounter several different kinds of barriers which in a way hamper their full participation or inclusion in the various domains of society. So these barriers can be physical, environmental, as well as attitudinal. And let's discuss these in a little greater detail. So what are barriers? Barriers are the factors that prevent or limit a person with disability in terms of mobility, that is the ability to move from one place to another, communication, that is the ability to participate in a kind of give and take of information and feelings and conversations and so on, social interaction or participation in an activity. So there may be barriers to an individual's participation in various kinds of activities, and therefore this makes them feel isolated, vulnerable, and excluded. So therefore, it is very, very important for us to understand what we mean by barriers and what is the impact of barriers on the day-to-day lives of persons with disabilities. So we see that barriers can restrict a person's participation in education, employment, healthcare, sports, recreation, and community living, to name just a few important factors. So let's begin by talking a little bit about attitudinal and social barriers. What are the various attitudes or what are the various ways of thinking about persons with disabilities that in a way prevent them or act as barriers to their inclusion? So we have in earlier programs discussed the concept of ableism. Now, ableism, as we had earlier explained, is a way of looking at persons from the lens of whether they are able to do things or not. So regarding persons with disabilities in some way as being inferior to non-disabled persons. This very simply is what we mean by ableism. And ableism comes with a number of beliefs, stereotypes, and negative images which are associated with persons with disabilities. So we've discussed some of these in the previous programs. We've spoken about how persons with disabilities may be considered as burdens to society or may be regarded as objects of pity. They may be seen as people who are incapable of doing the things that non-disabled persons do. They may be seen as being, in a sense, eternal children, or they never quite grow up. They may be seen in the perspective of not having the capacity or the ability to take their own decisions, to marry, to raise a family, and to contribute to society. So all these capacities may be doubted by the general society when it comes to persons with disabilities. We've also discussed the concept of eternal children, or the way in which persons with disabilities may be seen as actually never being able to quite grow up or become adults, which is a completely wrong belief, because especially if they have conditions like intellectual disabilities, they may be seen as being permanent children, or they may be seen as requiring care all their lives. So all these attitudinal barriers, or all these various stereotypes about persons with disabilities, they naturally create a very negative perception about the person with disability as being, in a way, a person who cannot really do anything, a person who really cannot contribute to either the family or the community. And therefore, this results in them being excluded from the activities of society. So these were some of the attitudinal barriers that we discussed. Now let's talk a little bit about physical barriers. What do we mean by the physical barriers that confront persons with disabilities, or that persons with disabilities have to actually deal with in their day-to-day lives? So these are really the structural obstacles in either the natural environment or the man-made environment that prevent or reduce mobility or access. Let's take a simple example. If you go to a public place, you go to a bank, you go to an office, you go to a school, and there are steep steps, a person with disability would not be able to negotiate this if they are a wheelchair user. And if there is no ramp available, they will not be able to access that space. So there may be lack of handrails or lifts for those who have difficulty in using stairs. One very, very important thing is a lack of disabled-friendly toilets. Very often toilets are extremely inaccessible for persons with disabilities. The flooring may not be suitable for persons who may be using a cane or may have difficulty in walking. So there are so many physical barriers or environmental barriers that prove very difficult for persons with disabilities to actually access public space. And when they cannot access public spaces, when they cannot, for instance, use buildings or use educational institutions, use workplaces and so on, they then become excluded from these very, very important aspects or these very, very important dimensions of society. So there are also a number of communication barriers which are experienced by persons who have difficulties in hearing, speaking, reading, writing, or understanding. So for instance, a person with hearing impairment may find it very difficult to be able to be included in a situation where there is only auditory input is given or only verbal inputs are given, where there is no access to sign language or there is no access to other kinds of technologies which will help them to understand the various messages. Similarly, if a person is not able to see very well, they have low vision or blindness, so very fine print or written messages may also become inaccessible. They may not be able to read them. So we've also mentioned the issues that may be experienced by persons with hearing impairment. So for instance, videos that don't include captioning, these will become inaccessible for persons who have hearing impairments. What about persons with intellectual impairments or learning disabilities? So very technical language, very long and complex sentences, or information that is given in an extremely verbose kind of a format becomes difficult for individuals with learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities to understand. So therefore, even in terms of how we write instructions or how we write text is very, very important for persons who may have intellectual impairments. Now, let's come to something that affects every one of us and a very, very important aspect of our day-to-day lives, particularly in our towns and cities. In other words, transportation. All of us utilize transportation to get to one place to another, to make use of public facilities, and without access to transportation, we will find it extremely difficult to access basic services and to become independent and function in society. So, for instance, if a child with disability wants to go to school, but the school bus is inaccessible, or if an individual with disability wants to go to the office or the workplace, but transportation is very inaccessible. There may not be ramps in the buses or the trains. The wheelchair, there may not be facilities to move a wheelchair into it. There may not be public transport at convenient distances. So you may have public transport, but if the distance from the individual's house to the bus stop or the metro station or the railway station is very long or very large and the person has no way to reach these transport facilities, it will become very difficult for them to access transportation and therefore access different places and different services. What are some of the other very crucial barriers that we need to speak about? So one of these is barriers in service delivery. And these affect all the various services that we take so much for granted. For example, health services, going to the hospital or going to the clinic can sometimes be a matter of a lot of inaccessibility for a person with disabilities. And we shall discuss this in greater detail in a little while. And one kind of barrier which we also need to bear in mind is lack of implementation of policies for persons with disabilities. So in the present times, we have very, very good laws, very good policies in place. We have a rights-based scenario for persons with disabilities. And India, it is a matter of great pride that we have amongst the most progressive legislations for persons with disabilities. For instance, we have spoken earlier about the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. However, despite the existence of these very progressive and enabling laws, many people are not aware of these laws. Many persons with disabilities themselves are not aware or not apprised of what are their rights under the law, and so they really cannot demand their rights. Also, persons in workplaces may not be willing to actually abide by these laws. They may really not give these laws the kind of attention that is needed in order to include persons with disabilities. So this is something very, very important, and there is an urgent need for people to be sensitized about the laws, and there is a need to ensure that these laws are properly implemented so that they will be of use or be of importance or help persons with disabilities to be included in society. Now let's look at some of the issues of access, or let's look at some of the experiences actually of persons with disabilities in terms of access. So one of the very, very important places, or one of the important dimensions in all our lives, is our workplace. The workplace is where we spend a large part of our day. Going to work is what gives us a status in society, a position in society. It gives us an income. It gives us the ability to run our families, and is as such a very crucial aspect of our identity. Now, in the workplace, there are often a number of barriers experienced by persons with disabilities. Let's look at some of them. So physical barriers, of course, we've earlier spoken about them. We've spoken about transport. If a person has so much difficulty in accessing transport to reaching the workplace itself, naturally, it is going to have an impact upon their overall sense of well-being. If a person reaches the office or reaches the workplace extremely tired because the transportation is so difficult to negotiate, then they are not going to be able to perform to the best of their capacities. Access to other departments, so for instance, in the office building or in the workplace itself, can the individual with disability move freely from one department or one part of the building to the other? Common facilities like the canteen, toilets or lavatories, fire exits, equipments, tools and machinery required for work, all these are needed, or all these need to be accessible for the person with disabilities in order that they may have a positive experience at work. So these are some of the physical barriers that we have spoken about. There are also major psychological barriers that are experienced by persons with disabilities. This is very similar to the attitudinal and social barriers that we had spoken about earlier. So what are some of the psychological barriers that they encounter? So in working with non-disabled colleagues, very often they may feel a sense of lack of self-esteem, a sense of inferiority because of the existing attitudes, because of the way in which the world treats persons with disabilities, which can often be not very respectful. They may have difficulty in communicating their needs, actually sharing freely and frankly with colleagues what it is that they need and what it is that they require. They may have difficulties in interpersonal relations. If colleagues are very negative, if colleagues have stereotypes about persons with disabilities, and therefore adjusting to new responsibilities, job roles, meeting deadlines, and so on, may prove challenging if they do not have the support and they do not have the kind of help in terms of, boosting up their confidence, boosting up their self-esteem that is required for anybody who is at the workplace. There are also a number of ICT-related barriers. So a study by Joshi and Thomas in 2019 actually spoke about some of these barriers. Now, ICT, or Information and Communication Technology, is supposed to be something that will simplify life or create accessibility. But sometimes it is seen that ICT also does not provide sufficient accessibility to persons with disabilities. So the laptops, computers, electronic devices, internets and intranet, various applications, audio, video, multimedia products, all need to be designed keeping in mind the needs of persons with disabilities. So learners, what we must try and understand, and we must try and take the perspective of other people, is what is the day-to-day life, working life of a person with disabilities like? How does he or she negotiate transport, reach the workplace? How is the workplace? What kind of treatment do they receive at the hands of their colleagues and superiors, and so on? And we need to really engage with their experiences, and therefore, by engaging with their experiences, the workplace can be made more accessible and more friendly. And when you have an accessible and friendly workplace, naturally, persons with disabilities would feel, and everybody, not just persons with disabilities, everyone would feel comfortable, would feel safe, and therefore the organization itself would do well when the employees are happy, when the employees are well taken care of. So accessibility at the workplace is a very, very crucial aspect that we need to think about. Now, let's look at another very, very important dimension of accessibility, and that is healthcare. Now, learners, as you would have realized, persons with disabilities very often need to access healthcare more than non-disabled persons because their various conditions may require more frequent visits to the doctor or to the health center or to the hospital. So timely healthcare is very important for persons with disabilities so that their conditions are taken care of and so that other kinds of conditions that may result are prevented and taken care of in a timely manner. But what do we often see in our public health facilities? This is something I'm sure all of you must be familiar with. We often, due to the sheer size of our population, due to the sheer numbers of persons who require healthcare, there is a lot of burden on public health systems, and therefore long waiting times and limited availability for medical appointments is something which is a reality. And we see it everywhere. We see long queues waiting for an appointment with a doctor. We see persons who have come from different parts of the country who have no place to stay. Very often they may be just trying somehow or the other to stay in the vicinity so that they can get a medical appointment and so on. And because of this, very often persons with disabilities really avoid getting the kind of medical attention that they need, because just getting medical care can sometimes be such a challenging activity. Within the health system also, communication barriers. So for instance, persons with various kinds of disabilities may not be able to communicate their issues to the doctor. A very busy doctor may not have the time to really listen or try to understand what the person with disability is saying. Those who may not be verbal, not be able to use verbal speech, and may use other modalities of communicating. There may be difficulties in actually trying to understand what is their problem and what needs to be done, what help that they need. And attitudinal barriers, which we've spoken about time and time again, we see that these attitudinal barriers are also very much there within the medical profession itself. So medical professionals also may share the same prejudices and the same misconceptions about persons with disabilities as other members of society do. Because after all, they are also members of society, and they get their value systems, they get their understanding of social reality from the society that they live in. So this is an important fact that needs to be kept in mind. Also, we find that parents of children with disabilities may find it difficult to actually take their child to hospitals and clinics because there may be a very long waiting queue. A child with disability may have problems in waiting, especially those who may have intellectual disability or conditions like autism, may find it very hard to wait for very long periods. And so parents may actually not take their child for a timely medical appointment. And had they taken their child for timely medical attention and appointments, perhaps the problem would have been detected early. And in many kinds of disabilities, early detection often helps in proper treatment and rehabilitation. So these are some of the health barriers that we can think about. Now let's look at another important barrier that persons with disabilities often experience, and that is in accessing sports, recreation, leisure, and cultural activities. Now, education, health, employment, all these are of course very, very important. But what would life be if there was no fun in it? There was no recreation, there were no pleasurable activities, that we did not have things, cultural activities, travel, tours, being with friends, going to a restaurant to eat a meal, sharing fun times with our friends. What would life be without all these things? It would be extremely boring and dull. And we have to bear in mind that persons with disabilities also have the same rights to access these various facilities, which make our lives more interesting and more culturally rich and creative. So participation in sports, cultural activities, travel, cinema halls, theatres, museums, religious places, going on a pilgrimage, going on a yatra, all these add value to our lives. But we have to ask ourselves whether all these facilities are actually accessible to persons with disabilities. So the next time you go to a tourist spot or the next time you go to a restaurant, reflect upon whether that place is actually accessible for persons with different kinds of disabilities. So attitudinal and social barriers, they may result in persons with disabilities not really being included in these pleasurable activities. We often see that parents with a child with disability are reluctant to take their child out for social activities or for parties or for celebrations because the stigma and shame that they experience is so high that they really don't want to expose themselves or their child to the wider society. And this is very unfortunate because it results in the child feeling excluded and the child also internalizing this stigma. So it is very important for all of us to create an environment where persons with disabilities are welcomed, where spaces are available for them to freely enjoy and participate in the same way as anybody else in society. Now, these were some of the barriers that we've spoken about. What are the opportunities? How can technology really help or create a situation where many of these barriers can be addressed? Now, learners, we are living in a very, very exciting time in human history. Digital technology, the digital revolution, as we call it, has led to an explosion of all kinds of ways in which we can communicate, share information, and do things which were unimaginable maybe even 10 or 20 years ago. So the internet, mobile telephones, online education, e-commerce, and something that all of us are very, very excited about, and that is artificial intelligence, which all of you, I'm sure, must have heard of. So we can see this in three very interesting domains. Firstly, in the domain of education. So education technology, or EdTech as we call it. So EdTech means basically integrating technology and education and making education available or opening up education for people who would not have otherwise been able to go to a regular school or a college or a university for a variety of reasons. So online learning is something which the world has really taken up in a very big way, particularly in the post-COVID era. So that is something in which we see technology being used in a very big way to make classrooms open to persons who may not be actually able to go to the classroom physically. And for persons with disabilities, educational technology can be a great boon in helping them to access materials, to access education from the confines of their home or from the safe spaces in which they feel comfortable in. Remote work and networking. This is also a very, very important area. So we have all heard of the concept of work from home, which really came into its own during the pandemic period. So even though it came about as a result of a global crisis, so there was a pandemic, so people could not actually go out. But in many ways, working from home or working remotely can be of great benefit for persons with disabilities. So all the barriers that we've spoken about, the physical barriers, the transportation barriers and so on, they really would not have to deal with it if they can work from within their homes. So this has a lot of potential and has a lot of chance of being something that persons with disabilities can really benefit from. And we also have what we call fintech or financial technology. Now, very often persons with disabilities may not be able to access banks or financial institutions to get loans and so on. But when technology, when financial facilities or services are linked with technology and available to all of us through online medium, it becomes much easier actually to access things that would have been difficult to do earlier. With that, learners, we come to the end of the first part of today's program, in which we have covered some of the broad issues that were outlined in Unit 18. In the second part, we shall discuss the other two units which deal with assistive technology and universal design. See you on the other side.
Do you know that the world's population has reached 8 billion on 15th November 2022? And we are still counting. I don't know where do we go from here. The predictions are scary. Any idea how many people can Mother Earth sustain? India's growing population is a serious concern, and we are soon going to become the world's most populous country. Wow, number one. Population is, after all, a human issue. The UN proposed Sustainable Development Goals cannot be achieved unless and until we consider the population dynamics. So, here we are. Indira Gandhi National Open University offers appreciation course on population and sustainable development. The course explores the linkages between population and sustainable development. In this course, there are diverse issues related to population, environmental safety, livelihoods, human health, migration, urbanization, and much more. The course duration is 3 months, but of course, you can complete it within a year. The eligibility of the course is graduation from a recognized university. So, if you are a development professional, working in a government sector, researcher, or keen to know more about the population and sustainable development, the course is must for you. Hurry up and join this course so that we are able to convert population into demographic dividend and not convert it into demographic disaster. For more information, visit www.ignou.ac.in. Thank you.
Welcome back, dear learners, to the second part of this particular program. Now, in the first part, we basically looked at the way in which access or accessibility plays such an important role in the lives of persons with disabilities, and how the various barriers that persons with disabilities experience can lead to their exclusion and, in a way, hamper their rights to access the same facilities as everybody else in society. We also mentioned how technology can play such a major role in helping them tide over some of these barriers, and we shall be discussing it in greater detail in this part of the program. And we shall be talking about the two units in the block, unit number 19 and unit number 20, which deal with assistive technologies and universal design. So let's start by talking about assistive technology. Now, the term assistive technology, as the word suggests, means any technology that assists people to do various things. According to the World Health Organization, an assistive product is any external product which includes devices, equipments, instruments, or software whose primary purpose is to maintain or improve an individual's functioning and independence and thus promote their well-being. So there are various kinds of assistive devices that we may use in our day-to-day lives, and you must be familiar. Assistive devices sounds like a technical term, but when you think about what these devices actually are, you will realize that in your everyday life you are surrounded by these devices. So let's speak of some of the major types of assistive devices. The first, which you will probably be most familiar with, are mobility devices. So mobility devices basically refer to any kinds of devices which help you to move better. So these would include a cane to walk with, or a wheelchair, crutches, and so on and so forth. We also have prosthetics, that is artificial limbs, orthotics, which is basically something that supports a body part which is not functioning well. So spinal braces or calipers, these come under the category of orthotics. And also we have orthopedic shoes, so very specially designed shoes that help an individual to walk better or to have greater comfort in walking. There are also many daily living devices. So you may see certain kinds of cups or sippers which will help a person to drink water or drink liquids in an easier manner. Certain kinds of adapted plates, cups, or cutlery which will help an individual to handle them better. So in day-to-day life, there are many daily living devices that will help an individual to lead their day-to-day life in an easier manner. There are many vision devices which help an individual to see better in case they have difficulties in seeing. Audio devices, hearing devices, communication devices, cognitive devices, in other words, those devices that help people who may have learning difficulties to communicate better. So we will not go into the details about the different kinds of assistive devices because there are so many and they are all around us, and this is something that you have to observe in your day-to-day life. Let's talk really about the need and role of assistive devices or assistive technology. Now, it's important to note that assistive technology is something that is very important across the lifespan. So throughout an individual's life, assistive technology is of great importance and can really help to better the quality of lives of people with disabilities or people with other kinds of illnesses or various kinds of physical or mental conditions for which they need assistive devices or different kinds of support from technology. So it's important for us to bear in mind that access to assistive technology, or AT as we'll call it throughout this talk, it is considered as a human rights issue. So it is considered as a human right to have access to technology which will help us to lead our lives in a better and a more productive way, according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which, as we know, is a very important document or a very important convention that has laid out the rights of persons with disabilities. Now, according to a report by the WHO and the UNICEF, 2.5 billion people need AT to live their lives to their full potential. And they estimate that by 2050, 3.5 billion persons are likely to need assistive technology. Now, we all know that longevity is increasing, people are living for longer, and therefore, as we age also, our functionality of our bodies also lessens, and therefore assistive devices or assistive technology is extremely helpful and essential for helping us in old age also to be able to discharge our day-to-day functions in a better manner. Let's consider some of the benefits of AT. Now, AT has huge benefits in the field of education. So if a child with disability right from the start has access to assistive technology, that child is likely to feel himself or herself better included. So for instance, if a child with a visual disability goes to school and has access to Braille or to various kinds of devices or various kinds of technology that will help them to read better, has access to computers computer software which can enable them to hear the lessons, all this is certainly going to benefit that individual or that child to access education. They will not feel that education is not for them. They will not feel that education is a right that is not theirs. So when they have access to AT from an early age, they are able to actually make a lot of progress in their education. And once they have done well in the educational field, or they have attained qualifications or been trained for various jobs, they can then also find inclusion in the workplace. So the workplace also is a place where assistive technology is of immense use. And we'll speak more about it in more detail about it later to see just how assistive technology can assist persons at the workplace. In the domain of health also, we find that assistive technology is very, very important. So to manage different kinds of health conditions, to manage different kinds of physical issues and challenges, assistive technology plays a very major role. Similarly, in sports and recreation, we find that assistive technology enables persons with disabilities to be able to participate in sports. Now, I'm sure that you must have all heard of the Special Olympics and the Paralympics. So in these domains, we find that athletes who actually participate in Special Olympics or in Paralympics, with the help of assistive technology, they can actually play games and sports that were denied to them earlier. And you all also have probably heard that in the last Paralympics, which were held in 2023, our Indian athletes performed remarkably. So we won no less than 111 medals in the Paralympics, which is a matter of great, great pride for all of us as Indians. Also in everyday activities, assistive technology plays a very important role in helping us to actually deal with our day-to-day lives. So for instance, think about the kitchen, a person who may be a wheelchair user. With the help of assistive technology, they can make use of the various implements in the kitchen. They can cook. If the cooking top is adapted, if it is made in such a way that they can reach it, they can access it. We find that they are able then to do their day-to-day activities in a very efficient manner. So thus we see that assistive technology is of great benefit to all individuals, irrespective of disability throughout the lifespan. So when we talk about access to assistive technology, we also need to look at some of the realities of our everyday situation. Now, according to the National Center for Promotion of Employment for Persons with Disabilities, in India, they estimate that about 92% of persons with disabilities lack access to assistive technology. Now, we have to also add that the government is making tremendous efforts in this regard. You may have all heard of the Sugamya Bharat campaign, in which the Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan, or the Accessible India campaign, in which there is a very concentrated attempt by the government to make public spaces accessible for all persons with disabilities. You may also have heard of the scheme, the ADIP scheme, in which free aids and appliances are provided to persons with disabilities who come from socioeconomically weaker sections. So there is a lot of thrust, or there is a lot of emphasis given on providing aids and appliances or providing assistive technology to persons with disabilities who may need it. But unfortunately, there is a lack of awareness and a lack of access for a variety of reasons. One of the major reasons being that a very large percent of disabled population lives in the rural areas. And when they live in the rural areas, you find that they may not really have access to information. And also, if the terrain or if the area is not very easy to move around in, they may find it difficult to actually go to facilities or go to centers where they can get these aids and appliances. Once again, we come back to the very important issue of social stigma. Now, this is something that really, we cannot emphasize it enough. Because disability is still viewed by many sections of the population as a matter of stigma, a matter of shame, we find that persons would not actively seek to access assistive technology. We know that in many families who have a child with disability, they may not want to expose their child to the world. They may not want to acknowledge that this child has a disability because they are afraid of public reaction or stigma and so on. So the child is therefore not able to access the assistive technology or not able to really access the things that they need in order to help them to lead a better quality of life or to be able to do their work, to be able to function in an independent manner. So poor access and knowledge, as we have mentioned, many persons just don't know that these technologies actually exist, that there are so many technological tools and devices that may enable them to lead their lives in a more, be able to function better in their lives with the assistance of these technologies. We also find that there may be very few manufacturers of assistive products in the country, and therefore availability of these products also is limited or restricted. And there is also a lack of trained resource persons who can provide assistive technology services. So for instance, if one's device is not working or it breaks down, then to get it repaired may also prove to be a challenging task. But we have to emphasize that it's very, very important for us to note that assistive products, assistive technologies are of great utility and are very important, and that a number of attempts or a number of schemes and policies of the government are geared towards helping persons with disabilities to access these assistive technologies. And we must therefore be aware of them and spread this awareness. So what really makes assistive technology good or useful? So in other words, what are the qualities or the factors that lead to assistive technology becoming both appropriate as well as suitable? So remember, technology always has to be seen in the context of the people who use it and in the context of the society or the environment in which technology is being used. So is that technology suitable to users and their environment? So let's take an example. Suppose a person is living in a very hilly area, a rocky area where there is a lot of steep inclines, the roads are of a very poor quality. What technology will benefit that individual? If we give that person an electric-powered wheelchair, will they be able to maneuver that wheelchair in that kind of terrain? So will the technology that you have provided the individual be suitable to their needs? This is something which needs to be thought of when we speak in terms of assistive technology as being something that can really change the life of a person with disability. Affordability. Now, this is also very important. Certain assistive devices may be quite costly and they may be difficult or out of the reach of the person who really needs them. So affordability is also an important factor. They should also be easy to use. So if there is an assistive product or assistive technology which is very difficult to understand, if the instructions are given in very complicated language, suppose there is some problem, some technical problem with the device, that if the person who uses it has to go to a workshop, has to go, someplace far away to get it repaired and can't fix it themselves, this can then create a problem. So this device may then just be not used by the person because it is not easy to use. It should also be equitable. And what do we mean by this? So remember, persons with disabilities are not the same everywhere. There are a number of factors that really shape the life experiences of various persons with disabilities. We have earlier discussed, when we've spoken about intersectionality, we've spoken about how gender, caste, class, all these factors play a role in shaping the experiences of persons with disabilities. So is the technology something that takes into account that persons with disabilities may be from different situations, maybe from different genders? These are important considerations when we speak in terms of appropriate and suitable technology for persons with disabilities. Now, technology for persons with disabilities is something that is a very, very growing and a very exciting area, and in which a lot of attention, a lot of resources are being devoted. But when we speak of assistive technology, we see that assistive technology basically helps individuals who have certain kinds of physical or cognitive or other kinds of challenges to be able to lead their lives in a better manner, to be able to help them to function in a more efficient manner. But let us think of this a little differently. Rather than just having technology that helps persons with disabilities to be able to negotiate their everyday lives in a better manner, can we think larger, in a larger perspective, and think of redesigning our very environment in such a way that all persons are able to access it in a more comfortable manner? So the world comprises of so many different kinds of people. Diversity is such an important factor in our lives. So there may be people with various kinds of disabilities, of course. There may be people with different kinds of physical issues or challenges. There may be people of different ages. Is our physical environment designed in such a way that all these individuals are able to use these facilities in a comfortable and accessible manner? And this is what leads us to the very, very important topic which is covered in Unit 20, which is the concept of universal design. So what is universal design? So universal design basically is concerned with designing products and environments that can be safely and comfortably used by all. So they should be easy to use. They should be something that is easy to understand. They should be easy to, they should fit with our cultural and our social realities, and should actually be available or accessible to persons of all kinds of bodily shapes and types. So we speak of the need for accessible and inclusive design. So when environments are accessible, people with disabilities can also participate freely in social life and be viewed positively. And Shilpa Das, who is a scholar in disability studies, has made a very important point in which she says that social stereotypes and negative images about disability will also reduce when we see persons with disabilities getting an education, working, marrying, having children, running households, and having a social and community life. So this is a very important point to bear in mind, learners. When we see persons with disabilities in our social spaces, when we see them in our educational institutions, when we see them in the workplace, we see them out in public space, going for a film, enjoying a match, doing all the things that persons in society do, having children, getting married, raising their families, being able to take care of their families. When we see them do all these things, our negative conceptions about disability will then, over a period of time, start decreasing. Because this notion, this idea that we have that persons with disabilities cannot do anything, they are useless, they are a burden, this will then be broken. And for this, accessible environments, accessible technology, and universal design will play a very, very important role. So it's important to bear in mind that Article 9 of the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which we have discussed in great detail in earlier programs, ensures equal access to the physical environment, transportation, information, communications, and other facilities and services open or provided to the public to persons with disabilities. And in our context, in the context of our Indian law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, it also highlights accessibility as an essential requirement for all built environments and in all walks of life. So let's come now to discussing a little bit about universal design. Now, this term universal design was actually given by Ron Mace, who was an American architect and a designer. So, what the meaning of universal design is that the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So basically products which are designed in such a way that they are available or open to all kinds of users, and the greatest number of people can use them irrespective of their bodily types or their disability or lack of disability. So this is what is meant by universal design. Design that is accessible universally to the largest number of people possible. So some of the important principles of universal design are that it should be equitable in use, so it should be something that is available to all. It should be flexible. It should be, people should be able to adapt to it. It can be modified according to the needs of individuals. It should be simple to use. There should be perceptible information. That is, a person who is using a UD product should know very well, how it is to be used, because the information should be crystal clear. The tolerance for error. So by this we mean that in case a person makes some kind of a mistake or is not able to use the product effectively, there will be no kind of harm. So if a person is using a product wrongly, that doesn't mean that product is that there's going to be some safety or, health issue. So this is what we mean by tolerance for error. Low physical effort. So the individual should not have to take a lot of physical efforts to be able to use the product or the service that is based on universal design. And there should be size and space for approach and use. So it should be made in such a way that people can approach it easily, and the size is such that people can access it or use it in an easy manner. Now, there is also a very interesting way of thinking about universal design from an Indian or a culturally specific perspective. So rather than just adopting Western ideas without, really looking at our Indian context, that will not be a very good idea. So Universal Design India is something that actually looks at UD or universal design from our own cultural perspective. And there are some very interesting principles of Universal Design India that have been given. So one is equitable, in other words, what we call saman, usable, sahaj, cultural, sanskritic, economy, sasta, and aesthetics, or sundar. So your UD product should be beautiful to look at, it should be cheap, it should be economical, it should be affordable, it should be in sync, or it should be something that your culture recognizes and it is in tune with your culture. Of course, it should be easy to use, that is sahaj, and it should be available to all kinds of people, that is saman. Now, what are some of the benefits of universal design? Now, universal design is something that can be used by all age groups. It promotes community interaction and participation, and in the long run, over a period of time, it also becomes cost effective. So let me give you a simple example. Take a public park. Suppose it is a public park where, the facilities, the swings, the slides, etc. are designed in such a way that children with disabilities can also use them in a comfortable manner. There may be also very, pleasant or comfortable seating available. So is this park something that only children will use? Elderly people can also find it very comfortable. So if the seating is comfortable, you may find grandparents or elderly persons coming and sitting over there, enjoying themselves in the park. They may enjoy the company of the children who are playing in the park. So in this way, the community also, interaction between different sections of the community can be promoted. People will participate in social life. And whatever cost goes into making these products or this design, in the long run, over a long period of time, you find that the cost actually, it becomes cost effective, because these products or these services or these facilities which are designed on the basis of UD have a value or have a utility for a very long period of time. So let's look at some examples of accessibility and universal design. So if you look at the workplace, which we have been talking about throughout this program, which is such an important place where accessibility and the ability to be able to function in an independent manner is so crucial. So we find that UD can help to increase productivity, safety, collaboration and communication for all employees. So simple things, proper lighting, sufficient space for moving around, low noise levels for people who have a low tolerance for noise, no obstacles in the travel path, accessible entrances where perhaps wheelchair users can enter comfortably, door handles being at a level that can be manipulated or used by persons who may be using wheelchairs, so switches which are easily reached by all persons. So these are some examples. Similarly, chairs which are adjustable, workstations, computers which have accessibility features as we had mentioned earlier, communication systems which are accessible to all, which can help all kinds of people actually to communicate with them, and safety features which can be easily used by all the persons in the workplace. Now, one wonderful example in our own, in Delhi, is the example of the DMRC, that is the Delhi Metro Rail Corporation, which is really one of the first large-scale public transportation systems in India, which is designed with an eye towards universal accessibility. So the metro is designed to be accessible for everybody, and it pays specific attention to the needs of persons with disabilities. So what are some of the important features here? There is space to keep the wheelchair inside the metro compartment. There are handlebars that persons can hold on to. There are elevators at the metro stations that can be used by persons with disabilities or those who are finding it difficult to move. Audiovisual indicators. There's a line map in each of the coaches which helps us to understand or helps people to figure out exactly where they are. And at the interchange stations, a very interesting thing is there are colored footmarks. So if you want to switch from one line to the other, there are footmarks that are arranged in such a way that you will know exactly where to go when you want to change your line. Clear graphic signs about rules and regulations and so on. Universal design for learning, which we will cover in another program, is also a very important aspect of universal design. And UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, enables children who have difficulty in learning to be able to be incorporated or accommodated or to be included in the classroom through various techniques, through various tools which make learning accessible for all. So to conclude, learners, we find that persons with disabilities face numerous barriers in all walks of life and then therefore find themselves to be marginalized and excluded. Accessibility is crucial in creating an inclusive society. Assistive technology can significantly improve quality of life across the life course. Universal design makes efforts to make products, services, and environments easy for all persons to use. And it can make learning also accessible to all sorts of learners, accommodating diversity. And to end, we have to once again remember that we are all only temporarily able-bodied. And therefore, we need to work towards making a world that is inclusive and accessible to each and every one of us. Thank you for your patient listening.
Indira Gandhi National Open University, accredited with A++ grade.